Have you ever wondered how a tradition as profound as the Ramadan fast gets passed down from one generation to the next? It's so much more than just rules. It's really a journey that weaves together faith, family, and a lot of personal growth. So let's dive in and see how it's done. This question right here really gets to the absolute heart of it. How do you teach devotion through something like patience and an empty stomach? It's all about nurturing a spiritual practice in a young heart, not just enforcing a set of rules. So let's break down how families tackle this beautiful challenge. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the why, the whole spiritual purpose behind it. Then we'll get into the when and the how, the right time to start and the gentle methods people use. We'll also tackle some real-world challenges, talk about the number one priority, which is health, and finally, look at the ultimate goal of it all. Okay, let's start with the core purpose. Why even introduce this practice to kids? Well, from an Islamic perspective, fasting is way more than just not eating or drinking. It's really seen as a foundational lesson in building character. I love this analogy, which so many parents use. They describe Ramadan as exercise for our hearts. It's such a powerful way to frame it, right? It's not about hardship. It's about training and strengthening those spiritual muscles, the ones that help us with patience, kindness, and self-control. So here's a breakdown of what those spiritual muscles are. The first one, cultivating taqwa, you can think of it as a kind of mindfulness or just being constantly aware of God in your life. And the others really flow from that. It strengthens willpower, what we might call grit or delayed gratification today. It builds empathy by letting a child feel just a little taste of what others might experience. And it fosters this deep, profound gratitude for blessings we take for granted every day. Okay, so we've got the why. Now let's talk about the when. At what age does this all begin? It's so important to understand that there's a big difference between when fasting is encouraged as a practice and when it actually becomes an obligation. So, according to Islamic tradition, the formal requirement to fast the entire month doesn't actually start until a child reaches puberty. The years leading up to that are really seen as a time for gentle education and preparation, not a requirement at all. And this whole preparation phase is guided by this beautiful principle called Tadrij. Think of it as gradual, compassionate training. The goal isn't to force a habit. It's to let a child grow into the practice naturally, at their own pace, so they can really understand its meaning and feel the benefits for themselves. And you can see this principle reflected right here, across all the major schools of Islamic thought. Notice the start ages. They kind of hover between 7 and 10, but look at that P principle column. Every single one stresses that the training depends on the child's physical ability and well-being. Health is always the priority. So that brings us to the how. How do parents actually turn this journey of patience and empathy into something positive? Well, the focus is overwhelmingly on encouragement and celebration, not on enforcement. One of the most popular techniques is what you could call the microfast. It's a really simple step-by-step approach. It might start with something as small as just skipping an afternoon snack. From there, maybe they'll try fasting for a few hours. And that often leads to attempting a half-day fast. Sometimes it's called a birdie fast, usually on a weekend. Every single step is treated like a huge victory, which makes the whole thing feel achievable and super rewarding. And get this gentle approach has really deep roots. There's this story from the early Muslim community that's just so telling. Parents would make toys, and when their kids got hungry, they would gently distract them with play until it was time to eat. It's a powerful historical example of that same compassionate, child-first approach that parents still use today. And it's not just about what you're not doing. Families create this entire atmosphere of joy around the month. They might use countdown calendars to build excitement or make good deed trees, where you add a new leaf for every act of kindness. A huge one is getting kids involved in preparing this special sunset meal, iftar, with all the wonderful smells and tastes. It's all about positive association. Of course, for a lot of families, this spiritual journey is happening inside a society that isn't observing Ramadan. And that presents a pretty unique set of challenges and opportunities, especially when it comes to school. I mean, to really understand the scale of this, just think about this number. There are around 1.35 million Muslim kids in U.S. public schools alone. For them, Ramadan is a whole month of balancing their faith with the regular rhythm of a school day, from the lunchroom to the gym. And, that balance isn't always easy. A 2021 survey actually found that over half of Muslim youth said they felt uncomfortable, unsafe, or unwelcome at school because of their identity. And during Ramadan, when their practice is a little more visible, those feelings of being different can sometimes get even stronger. So what can schools do to help? Well, the solutions are often pretty simple, but they're incredibly effective. Things like offering a quiet space during lunch, like the library, instead of the loud cafeteria, or providing low-impact alternatives in PE class. These small accommodations can create a culture of understanding and just make a world of difference for a student. And that brings us to a point that is the absolute foundation for everything we've talked about, health and safety. Across every tradition, every teaching, the message is crystal clear. A child's well-being is the #1 non-negotiable priority, period. Parents teach their kids to really listen to their bodies. Feeling a little tired or hungry, that's a normal part of the experience. But there are very clear warning signs, things like dizziness, confusion, or a headache that just won't go away. And those mean the fast must be broken immediately. Safety always, always comes first. And of course, nutrition is absolutely key to this. The pre-dawn meal, suhoor, is so essential. The focus is on foods that give you sustained energy. Think oats, yogurt, eggs. Then for iftar, the sunset meal, the tradition is to break the fast gently with dates and water. That rehydrates you and gives you a natural energy boost before you move on to a balanced main meal. So this brings us to our final section, which is really about the ultimate goal. I mean, after all this training and care and attention, what's the desired outcome? Well, it's not about creating perfect little festers. It's about something much, much deeper. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The most effective teaching tool isn't a rule book or a lecture. It's the positive emotional experience. It's the warmth of family gathering for a meal, the shared memories, and that distinct feeling that this month is truly special, set apart from all the others. So, at the end of the day, the goal is not perfection, it's participation. The focus isn't on how many full days a kid manages to fast. It's about celebrating every single effort. It's about planting those seeds of faith through shared family moments of patience, gratitude, and joy. And that really leaves us with a final, important question to think about. As this ancient tradition gets passed down in our modern world, how can creating a real sense of belonging, both at home and in our communities, help shape a generation that is not only disciplined, but also deeply compassionate? Thank you for joining me.